Thank you so much for giving us this great opportunity. And I think it's always a privilege to share thoughts and listen to South Africans, because I think at times as leaders, there's an inherent assumption that we are the fountain of all wisdom. And yet actually, there are a lot of South Africans who contribute, and that is my story and that's my journey. I think it's helpful for people to understand why Mmusi Maimane intersects with this particular conversation. As a child who grew up in Soweto, you cannot deny the fact that politics became interested in you, even if you were not interested in politics. But I think there is a world before 1994 that is often unsketched. And it is a world where there were many Black South Africans who were entrepreneurs, who were thinkers, who were critical, who were people who fought for a South Africa for all without seeking positions. And I think it's important that we recognize those people, because literally 2 days ago, we celebrate World Media Day, or at least yesterday. It brought back that memory, because down the road from me was Agri-Class Day, the intellectual newspaper editor of the newspaper Sowetan, which expressed views of many South Africans. But I start there because these were citizens who lived down the road from us, who were people who were sharing ideas, imparting knowledge. And what we've lost as South Africans are those kinds of people who are living in communities to impart a degree of knowledge and thought and give thought leadership. But alongside that were people like Ndate Mashaba or Maponya, people who started mega businesses right in the streets of Soweto, and teachers like Ndate Shole Mashao, who lived literally down the road from us. These are South Africans that have their story in the meta story of South Africa. And the reason I cite them is because the theme tonight, which is the idea of advocacy, activism, and entrepreneurship, can never be further epitomized other than those three individuals. Because I think something happened in 1994 that we simply deem the miracle of South Africa. But what exactly took place? Yes, it was a great transition, but what did it mean? There were a couple of things. One is it created a new contract, a contract between political parties or big political parties, big business, big unions. This is what everybody would get out of a negotiated settlement. The first is that those who sought political power would get political power. That's, in some ways, if you think about the political parties of the day, they got the government, they got the institutions of government. But what they did not get is that business, and therefore big business was left to do its own thing. And that was important. It was important for people to know that actually, if you're a big businessman, whether you ran Sanlam, whether you ran anything, the agreement was you can have the state so long as we keep businesses going. But the big mobilizing entities prior to 1994, no one can deny the role of the UDF and no one can deny the role of labor. The agreement was then in many ways that we would give above inflation labor increases. And so long as those increases were given to people who work, then the infrastructure of the economy would remain as such. You gave the one constituency, which is labor, above inflation increases. You gave the other constituency, which was political parties, political power, and you left business to those who ran big business. Subsequent to that, the introduction of welfare meant that in many ways we give welfare to poor citizens so that ultimately we keep a degree of stability. If you then look at South Africa's macroeconomic plan, the RDP meant something. Subsequent to that, you ended up with not only the Reconstruction and Development Plan, you ended up with GEAR, and then you started with things like ASGISA, which was the Accelerated Shared Growth Initiative. And then now today, we're talking about an economy in South Africa where in essence, you have the insiders and the outsiders. You are struck with a struggle upon which there are some who are included somewhere in the center with a sea of poverty that sits alongside them. I think it's worth reflecting on that point because it's going to be important to understand what type of entrepreneurship we need. We don't just need entrepreneurs who start business. We need entrepreneurs who are activists for inclusion. The fight today is against anybody who has access to power and uses that power against any citizen. So if you begin to understand that, let's look at some of our economic stats. First and foremost, 55% of our citizens live below the upper poverty line. The net income in that space is just over 1,200. Only 2% of our citizens earn above 20,000. When you look at the landscape of business in South Africa, of course, our economy has transitioned through many different phases, but we have to be able to reset our economy if we are going to see seedlings of growth. Because now, if you understand that we live in two South Africas, a South Africa of those who are included and a South Africa of those who are excluded. And the included are those who are able to master political power, be able to master labor rights. And they are the excluded, those who are without work, who the majority of which are young people. 2 out of 3 people who are unemployed in this country are young people. You can then appreciate well within that context that South Africa, if it continues to live in many South Africas, a South Africa that is urban, a South Africa that is rural, a South Africa that is rich, and a South Africa that is poor, we shall not have peace in this country. And frankly, we should not have peace. So here's what we need. We need, first and foremost, an economic reset. To me, when we talk about One South Africa, it was born out of the fact that we wanted to build a South Africa for all citizens, black and white, upon which all men and women can prosper together and live together peacefully. If to achieve that, we need an economic reform. And there are some crucial aspects. The first thing is that I understand what it means in some ways to be an entrepreneur. Prior to entering formal body politics, I actually ran a consultancy where we spoke to over the top 100 companies in South Africa, seeking to develop leadership. I came from a mother who, for most of my upbringing, was unemployed. And so we survived. I got through school because my mother sold eggs for us to survive. So this is the country and the upbringing I held. And that's how I made a way of being able to survive and hustle. When I finished school, both my parents, my father worked for a company and he got the deal where he got above inflation increases. But for many of us, we didn't have money. So the only way I could survive getting through university was not only through that egg business, but was being able to get a title deed that we were able to get a loan against so I can pay for my first degree. And I worked part-time for Total Sports. And the other time I was able to do certain motivational speeches just to earn a living so that we can get through. I'm grateful not only for that title, I'm grateful for the loan and the opportunity to sit here today with 2 master's degrees and busy with a PhD. So the first aspect that we've got to achieve if we are going to get certain things right in the economy is we have to allow those who are excluded a degree of title. Now, yes, there is a strong justice discussion about land, but I would argue that land is only but one component of the issue. Title, giving title to people is crucial because it's against that they can leverage assets. It's against that you build a particular capital base upon which you can access loan and investment and being able to have something that you can trade against. The second dynamic is about ensuring that more than anything, we give people a particular degree of shareholding. The contract that Labour got should not only have been about above inflation increases, but it ought to be about how do we increase pensions, particularly pensions of Black South Africans, in order that there's a transference of wealth into the next generations. Our fathers and mothers worked, many in mines, many away from home. We should by now have a generation of citizens who are inheriting high pensionable income so that they can use it to invest for the future. And I would urge that a reformation of any inclusionary instruments must ultimately ensure that there's a degree of pension that is given. Imagine if we'd reform some of the state-owned enterprises to say we will add to the pensionable income of many South Africans, we'd be able to transition furthermore. Already sitting in the fiscus today is 40 billion rands that is unclaimed benefit for particularly poor South Africans. Those South Africans are unidentifiable because our data instruments are outdated. That by the fact of the matter is that these are unclaimed pensions for many South Africans who could have been claimed today so we can stimulate the economy. So an asset base and addressing asset inequality is the first starting point that we need to get. And the reason why we say we need a different type of entrepreneurship, we need an entrepreneurship that has got social relevance. It's what even companies like BlackRock and big CEOs are beginning to understand, the fact that you can't today say you are going to just simply invest in a company that doesn't recognize that it lives within an ecosystem and it needs to look after citizens who are left out. Otherwise, it has no consumers of the future. No longer can the only measurement of business be the bottom line of profit. Surely, we should be asking better of entrepreneurs to say, can they be able to contribute to a social impact? Which leads to the second point. If we are going to see a revolution of entrepreneurs, we need to reform the education system of this country. And I would urge that the disempowering feature is the fact that we have a labor force that is progressively becoming unskilled and it is unemployed and unemployable, which is the second challenge, both separate issues. The first about employment is if we don't help create a national venture capital fund that can help micro enterprise, and that's a crucial thing that we need to advocate for so that small businesses can begin, so that they're not hamstrung by not having capital to start their business. I would urge that we need to a national venture capital fund, but linked with that, it needs to have educational output so that we have lifelong learning so we can reskill labor. You cannot tell me that someone who started mining 10 years ago is doing the same level of mining in the same way today, because that has already transitioned. Therefore, we need the type of entrepreneurship and activism that is driven around saying, how do we transition our communities? The third aspect is this simple issue that I keep raising. You must recognize the fact that even I myself, when I left the formal body politic, I went into a space, I said, we've got to start businesses. And when you begin a business, you realize that the barriers to entry can sometimes be hard in a world where you are locked in and locked out in a system that still resembles what looked like in the first 5 years of our democracy. It cannot be that in South Africa today, we still have a set number of insurance companies, we still have a set number of economic activity. We need to diversify, build a much more inclusive space so that more people can participate. So I understand the pain that many entrepreneurs get into. And not only are those who have started their businesses realize how hard it is in a world that is corrupted, corruptible, that they can't keep quick capital, they can't be able to sometimes gain access to certain markets. We have to do better as South Africa. But that parks this one component of an economic reset that focuses itself on a few key aspects of our economy so that we can build a much more inclusive culture. Second dynamic is when we talk about One South Africa, we argue the case to say, actually, we need advocacy, which brings me to people like Bontate Mashole Mashao or people like AgriCluster. These were citizens who understood that their freedom was not separate from the freedoms of everybody else, that they in fact needed to ensure that we build a freedom that advocates for those who are on the outside. That's why as One South Africa, we're always very deliberate about saying, don't fight for yourself. Fight against anybody who abuses power. Who is on the outside? And you need to fight harder for them. That's why I'm committed to saying our activism isn't just social. It's entrepreneurial, but also ensuring that we build a degree of advocacy that fights for those who are on the outside. When during COVID, people said to us, why are you fighting for schools? We said, because we are advocating not for schools who are in the upper quintiles where they are wealthy, but for poor schools. no fee paying schools, because those schools are in places where, in fact, people are still using pit latrines and you need to be able to assist them. It's that idea of advocacy and fighting for the outsider. And if we're going to create new leaders in society, they best be leaders who understand advocacy and fight for people who are left out on the outside. The third issue is this direct election bill that we've been fighting for. Because what we've lost in South Africa is an ability to have direct accountability amongst people. Our political leadership is corrupt and captured because it not only resembles that 1994 consensus where they could gain political power and it became a project of the elite. Now we are left with many poor citizens really without a voice. Imagine if people were directly elected by people, they could sit here today and be able to say, I'm going to hold you accountable for the PPEs that were stolen. For issues, I go to the Eastern Cape and I realize more than anyway that for many people have been left out, they are poor, but no one has been held accountable for that. How can that be? So I would argue the case that what South Africa needs today is three layers: a degree of activism, both economically and socially, that makes sure that no one in this country goes hungry. It's why when I went out of my way, even during COVID, we distributed over 2 million meals in communities to make sure no South African goes hungry. A partnership between power and potential, those with the means to work with those without the means. So we have to bring them together. When we talk about stimulating entrepreneurship, we went in the month of August and said, let us invest in businesses, particularly that are women-led. And I'm grateful to say a young woman called Lesego, who was running a company where she produces sanitary towels for poor people, that in fact today we've been able not only to give her mentorship through Don Nathan Jones, but also to invest in a business, be able to help a process with cash flow, because those who've run a business will know cash is king. Now we're trying to create market access for her in other communities so that she can ultimately prosper. That is the type of entrepreneurial support that we need, that is not only government dependent, but ultimately ensures that there's a better partnership. Last, as I say, we have to reform our societies. You cannot deny the fact that for any entrepreneur to succeed, you need a degree of financial capital, but more importantly, you need social capital. This is about us creating an ecosystem that helps entrepreneurs move up so that they are not trading on their own. I can't tell you how long it takes for an entrepreneur to be able to get a SARS tax clearance, to be able to get, if they want to export their goods, to get foreign documents to be done. Why can't we create an ecosystem as South African companies to say, if a company is exporting shoes and you make ties, partner with them so that you can, on the same container, deliver shoes and ties to China or to whatever foreign markets there are. We need to be able to do that. I close just with this thought. If we are going to build one South Africa, we cannot deny ourselves from the conversation around Africa. Intra-trade within Africa must be the new way we go forward. That's why we need to build infrastructure that ensures that goods can move here within Africa so that we can make sure that, in fact, our businesses can trade with their counterparts in Botswana, elsewhere. We need to create a model similar to ASEAN, which is how do the SADC countries work together so that they can be able not only to compete for global markets, but inter-trade within themselves. We have to think better for Africa. We have to, even around the energy sector, build an energy grid for sub-Saharan Africa so that we can leverage diverse energy forces such as gas in Mozambique and hydro in different parts, so that ultimately we produce cheaper energy so that our businesses in the region can thrive. I strongly believe that South Africa's future is dependent on young people. I hope the young people on this call are listening, because ultimately it is within your hands. We cannot be dependent on old economic models. We need a new consensus that emerges post this COVID issue. Because if we deal with the post-COVID, it needs a new consensus. You can't say the world must remain normal post-COVID. It is already, we are living through a new abnormal. We have to fix a new normal. Can't say what's going on now is normal or the new normal. It's not. It's a new abnormal. We need to build a new normal, a new economic model, a way that stimulates micro-enterprise, that builds activism, that ultimately ensures that we are advocating for other people so that we can build a movement of all South Africans. That's why, for me, unless we reform our politics by directly electing people, we'll end up with an elitist project of people who use state resources for private gain. If we don't reform our economy, we will never have peace in this country because we'll live in fear of one another and we'll have violence against one another. And unless we fix our education model, it is unlikely that we're able to create a skills base for future generations. This is the reformation that we need. That's why we celebrate our teachers. We must help them more and ultimately make the new entrepreneurs, the leaders of tomorrow. And therefore, for me, the call, that's what I'm working on now, is to say, let's bring about change politically, socially, and ultimately make sure that South Africans understand that economically things can change. And that is, if we really want to see change, it can't just be changing political parties. It is about resetting our entire modus operandi of society so that we build truly that one South Africa that prospers together and lives in peace together. So let me, at that point, Joka, park it there, and then I'm happy to take questions.